Uranium enrichment will increase to 60%. That begins in just a few hours. Tehran made the announcement just days after an attack on its Natanz nuclear facility. Iran has accused Israel, calls it sabotage, and has vowed revenge. Israel has made no official comment. Escalating enrichment will push Iran closer to that 90% level, which is needed for nuclear weapons. Indirect talks to try and salvage the Iran nuclear deal are set to resume on Thursday. Vienna. Well, insights into Iran's nuclear ambitions and warnings about Russia and China, all part of the annual threat assessment from the US intelligence community. This year, it's also warning of the devastating long-term impact of the coronavirus pandemic. CNN's Alex Marquardt takes a closer look.
This is an annual report from the intelligence community, except we didn't see it last year under President Donald Trump. And this report says what the intelligence community assesses as the biggest threats to the United States in the coming year. It talks about China becoming a near-peer rival of the United States, Russia and what it's doing to undermine U.S. influence, North Korea, Iran, all of this against the backdrop of the coronavirus pandemic. And that's where we see some of the most dramatic and distressing language and predictions in this report. The intelligence community writes, the economic and political implications of the pandemic will ripple through the world for years. The pandemic is raising geopolitical tensions, and great powers are jockeying for advantage and for influence. Russia and China, it says, are trying to take advantage through so-called vaccine diplomacy, gaining influence around the world through the distribution of their vaccines. The report goes on to list other dire ways that the pandemic will hurt countries, particularly lower-income countries, writing, some hard-hit developing countries are experiencing financial and humanitarian crises, increasing the risk of surges in migration, collapsed governments, or internal conflict. The pandemic has driven food insecurity worldwide to its highest point in more than a decade. It will increase the likelihood of additional health emergencies, especially among vulnerable populations in low-income countries. This report traditionally comes out before the heads of the intelligence agencies testify in front of Congress. But the last time that we saw those officials testify together was in 2019. Then, under President Donald Trump, they contradicted what he had said about Iran and North Korea, and he was furious about it. He told them, in fact, on Twitter, to go back to school. So last year, 2020, an election year, a very contentious year, the intelligence agencies didn't want to anger the president again. Essentially, they didn't want to put themselves out in public to become a target again for the president. So they pushed back on that hearing. The director of national intelligence at the time offered to do it behind closed doors. That was rejected by the Senate. And frankly, last year, the American people missed out on an important hearing. Americans and people around the world need to hear what these intelligence officials have to say. For example, in 2019, the report and the hearing predicted that the U.S. was vulnerable to a flu pandemic that would be very deadly. Of course, that turned out to be true.